One of the trending words recently during the CPC National Congress is definitely rejuvenation. And if I'm going to add another one, that would be Chinese modernization. I would like to talk about these in this episode, and I invited Fernando Munoz, a current affairs commentator from Colombia. Hi, Fernando. How are you doing today?
Hi, Abby. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I know you've also been following the CPC National Congress recently. What's your takeaway from the report?
The biggest thing is the topic of rejuvenation. That is something that has sparked a lot of interest in me because I have seen a lot of the success that the government has had over the last 2 decades that have been here in China. So to hear the government talk about rejuvenation makes me wonder, what does that mean? So having been able to watch subsequent sessions explaining what they want to do and what rejuvenation actually means has been very enlightening.
Please do tell us, what's your understanding? What is rejuvenation? What does it mean?
Well, my understanding is that China does not want to rest on its successes. They have accomplished a tremendous amount of success in poverty alleviation, in bringing education to all parts of the country, better health, better services for people. But at the same time, they realize that they're not done. There is more that can be done. They have built the basic requirements for the satisfaction of the needs of people, but there's always better ways of doing more to improve. So for me, rejuvenation is how to get people to the next level, to the higher level, which also explains in a way the re-election. The third term that we are going to see Xi Jinping taking. The project and his blueprint hasn't been finished, hasn't been accomplished yet. Every single one of the localities and the small villages and the small communities, they all have their own specific needs, and those needs to be listened to, they need to be addressed, and they need to be given solutions. So even though we've covered great amounts of work in the country, there are places that still need a little bit of help. So that adjusting and that adapting these principles that have been presented during the National Congress in Beijing takes place at that lower granular level. So that interpretation, that implementation is what rejuvenation is all about, is bringing these big principles, these big ideas that are presented in Beijing and showing people how to execute them and implement them in the smaller communities where people are most affected by them.
You mentioned jobs are not done yet. So what are the next steps?
What I have had the privilege of witnessing is going to rural areas and seeing some of the pilot projects that the government has brought to the countryside. Using, for example, the Internet of Things, using science and technology to improve the lives of farmers, to improve the quality of their produce, to improve the quantity of their produce, to improve the connectivity that they have to the actual marketplace. Those are a lot of pilot projects, but that doesn't mean that every single plot of land in the country is benefiting from this technology yet. So basically what we've seen now is that this works. This technology and this bringing the farmers to the marketplace through the internet, for example, or controlling crops through the internet, or helping resources reach where they're needed using the Internet of Things. This works and it's very successful. What they need to do right now is bring it everywhere, make it accessible to every person, every farmer, every community, every village in China. So that's what I mean. It's proven, it works. Now let's bring it everywhere. So that's a big aspect of my understanding of rejuvenation. Now, rejuvenation also has to do, in my opinion, with the newer generations of Chinese people like yourself. There is a need to care for the desires and the dreams and the wishes of the new generation of Chinese people. So how to involve them in democratic processes like the ones we have here in China. We're not going to discuss whether it is understood or not in the West. We know that there are democratic processes here, but how to involve those people, those younger people, into these decision-making processes at all levels of the country, that's another challenge that I see the government looking straight in the eyes and say, okay, this is something that we need to address, how to get younger people involved in, well, the politics and the running of the country, listening to them and what they have to say. So rejuvenation, again, it was mentioned so many times, and it can be applied to so many different aspects of the running of the country, such a big country like China.
Well, the report says the central task of the CPC is to lead the Chinese people to realize the second centennial goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects, and to advance the rejuvenation of Chinese nation through a Chinese way of modernization. So what is your understanding of Chinese modernization?
Well, modernization has to do with so many aspects of society, but one aspect that I would like to mention today is when you look at the younger generations that live in the countryside, most of them wish to go to the cities to find better jobs, to have a better life, that it's a lot easier. Now, what I think the government wants to do is to bring that same level of quality of life to the countryside, and in a way bring jobs, bring interest, bring tourism, and bring opportunities for younger generations in those communities in the countryside, in the villages, in the small towns. So that's going to be very interesting to see how younger generations find new options, new opportunities, and new ventures, not only in the cities, but in the countryside. So modernization means giving people opportunities to enjoy the same kind of easy life that we have in the cities, but also in the countryside.
It is different from the other modernization processes of other countries. What do you think is the unique part of this Chinese modernization?
Well, it's unique because China has its own sets of issues, has its own sets of problems. But the first one that you can think of is population. Making sure that the needs and the basic needs of 1.4 billion people, it's a challenge that no other country shares, perhaps India. There's also the diversity of not only the terrain and the geography, but also the culture, the language, the levels of education. So it's very unique in the sense that they need to encompass many things that are very unique to China. Large countries with large populations present challenges in trying to implement a one solution for all. It doesn't work like that. The principle is universal enough, but the implementation needs to be really adapted and flexible enough to satisfy the needs of different communities that might not share the same needs or interests or even the same aspirations.
Like you mentioned, we already have a foundation, we already have the basic structure. So what role does the CPC play?
I think that the role of the CPC in terms of modernization is to follow the blueprint that Xi Jinping has presented in his books, The Governance of China. That's his ideal, that's his vision, that's what he wants to accomplish. And the country has seen that and accepted that and said, like, this is what we want to do. So the role basically is to take this mandate, these principles, this vision, and implement it throughout the country. It's a lot easier to do in bigger cities where communication is easier, where there's so much access to education and people who are very talented in implementing these principles. It's a lot harder to do in smaller areas. So that's where the challenge is. Bring this prosperity, this better quality of life to rural areas. So the role of the CPC is basically implement the principles that have been presented already by Xi Jinping in his books and in his strategy to bring China to the forefront of growth and development in the world.